Okay, we should be streaming. Looks good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karava Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome to you all, and welcome to all of you watching this online. We have a lot of thoughtful questions today, and we'll take also questions from our local students. We'll start here with a question from Anshuman, who lives in Toronto. Let me just check the stream. Looks fine. Everything looks good. All right. So Anshuman asks, isn't the consciousness that neuroscience and philosophy are talking about, is it not the same as what Advaita Vedanta is talking about? And let's see, since science and I'll come back. He's making a reference, he heard from another guru, that whatever is taught in science and philosophy has no connection at all to Satchidananda Atma. A very absolute statement. And whenever you hear an absolute statement, you should absolutely be worried. Do you get it? Anyway, my point is that the world doesn't work with absolutes. This is a very complicated topic. Since science and philosophy are talking about subjective experience and being able to cognize an experience which happens due to Chaitanya, but not Chaitanya itself. It's a little hard to understand the language here. Here's the issue. I think it's a reference to last week's Satsang, many of you were here, when we had a long discussion about the role of science. Can science discover the same truth that Vedanta leads you to discover? And we had a long discussion. We're not going to redo that whole half-hour discussion, but the answer was absolutely not, from the standpoint of conventional science. Conventional science is focused on understanding the world around us. It looks out into the world using various kinds of instruments, and based on observation. Remember learning about the scientific method? After hypothesis is observation. Observation means observing the world. And right here is where we see the difference between science and Vedanta. Whereas science is observing the world, Vedanta is looking within. It's a completely it is an observation, but it is a very distinctly non-scientific observation in the sense that it's not focused on the outside world. That's true of conventional science, and it's equally true of modern neuroscience. Modern neuroscience is full of theories today about how your brain creates consciousness. And that's not our topic today. If you want to give me an hour or two, I will explain in great detail how neuroscience will never, ever demonstrate the origin of consciousness in the mind. And there are a few neuroscientists who have acknowledged that problem, and a famous philosopher who calls it the hard problem of consciousness, to describe, to understand what is the actual source of consciousness. And the problem is, here's the problem. If you're looking for the source of consciousness, you've already made a mistake. What is a mistake? Assuming that consciousness has a source? Right? Consciousness is not something that's sourced. It's not produced. It's not created. It's a fundamental reality. Let me come back now to Anshuman's question here. Mainstream science And he says, and philosophy. Mainstream science and mainstream philosophy are completely disconnected from what Advaita Vedanta teaches. That's mainstream. However, amongst the millions and millions, actually millions of scientists and philosophers out there, do you think a few of them might have inclinations towards Advaita Vedanta or Advaitic thinking? Of course. So a neuroscience or a philosopher who is not conventional in his or her perspective may indeed say things which look remarkably consistent with what is taught in Advaita Vedanta. And why should we be surprised when that happens? It's not surprising at all. But those, I have to say, that those scientists and philosophers are generally outside of the mainstream to the extent that they are criticized or even dismissed as being non-scientific. So, in general, science, neuroscience, mainstream philosophy are completely outside. Let me say, I don't know if I want to use the word incompatible. They have entirely different orientations as compared to Advaita Vedanta. But there are some, can we call them niche scientists? And and niche philosophers. There are some philosophers who are coming remarkably close to what is taught by Advaita Vedanta. So there is some modern philosophical theories about I'm trying to remember the terminology that they use. It escapes me at the moment. Not coming. Some of what is taught, it comes remarkably close to Advaita Vedanta. Then you might say, well, then do we need Advaita Vedanta? What is unique about Advaita Vedanta, and you might have heard me say this before, what makes Advaita Vedanta unique is not what it teaches, but how it teaches. So throughout history, there have been mystics of all religious traditions who have discovered the same truth as taught by the ancient rishis. I'm particularly taken by a Christian mystic, Meister Eckhart, who lived in Germany about 500 years ago. And some of what he wrote, it's Advaita Vedanta in Latin or German, but it's Advaita Vedanta. How did he get that? I have no idea. But he got it. And it looks to, by the way, do I know for sure that he actually discovered his true nature as Satchidananda Atma? I have no idea. But based on his teachings, it looks like he got it. Then you say, well, then we don't need Vedanta. Well, if you are a great mystic like Meister Eckhart, no, you don't need Advaita Vedanta. But if you are an ordinary person like me, we need Advaita Vedanta. Again, not because of what it teaches, but how it teaches. So the final comment here then is, for those niche philosophers whose teachings come remarkably close, again, mainstream philosophy doesn't touch this at all. For those niche philosophers whose teachings come remarkably close to Advaita Vedanta, the limitation is not what they say, but they lack the well-developed teaching methodology that makes Advaita Vedanta unique. This especially the methodology of Shankaracharya is absolutely unparalleled, unmatched. Okay, enough said. Any other phones can be turned off so we're not distracted. All right, next question comes from Maya. Maya asks, I think she lives, she doesn't say here, she's asked questions before, I think she lives in Singapore. In my teachings on the Mahabharata, I mentioned that tapas as a spiritual practice. Tapas, by the way, watch out, words have many meanings. You look up tapas in a dictionary, the first meaning you will find has nothing to do with spiritual practice. The primary meaning of tapas is heat, as some of you know. So, but in this context, we're talking about tapas as a spiritual practice. As a spiritual practice, tapas means willfully undergoing difficult or painful or uncomfortable experiences for the sake of purifying the mind, so to speak, and secondarily, and this is actually very big in the Jain tradition, in the Jain tradition is not secondary, it's primary. In the Jain tradition, the primary purpose of tapas is to exhaust your karmas. When you undergo suffering, you get rid of papa karma. So if you willfully undergo suffering as a spiritual practice, then you are, since tapas is fire, you are burning off, so to speak, all of these bad karmas. You can go on and on and on. The problem, however, is according to the theory of karma, you have an infinite amount of karma from an infinite number of prior lives. So that being the case, how much tapas do you think you'd need to do to burn off that infinite accumulation of karma? It's not a very good strategy at all, and that's not the strategy adopted in Advaita Vedanta. Tapas can be performed as a spiritual practice, as I said, for the sake, not so much for the sake of removing papa karmas, bad karmas, but rather preparing your mind, making your mind more resilient, learning acceptance, surrender, etc. But now the question here is with regard to the idea of exhausting karmas. What about situations that come unexpectedly? Tapas is willfully undergoing these unpleasant experiences. What happens when you don't willfully choose? When an angry person confronts you and starts shouting at you and all of this stuff. So what about those situations when it comes unexpectedly and you try to resolve, it doesn't work, and you go through it without complaining? You just accept when the person is shouting at me, and then you remind yourself, oh, wait a minute, according to the doctrine of karma, this person verbally abusing me is helping me exhaust my papa karmas. So it must be a good thing. That's a help, by the way, that's not a bad attitude to have, right? So, is that called tapas? If you mean tapas as a spiritual practice, being shouted at by an angry person is not a spiritual practice. It just happens. Does it exhaust your papa karmas? Yes. Maya does also say, though, you go through it without complaining. If that person is verbally abusing you, whether you complain or not, you're suffering. So it has nothing to do with accepting the suffering of life. According to the doctrine of karma, the process of suffering itself, whether you accept it or you don't accept it, whether you understand it according to the doctrine of karma or whether you have no idea what is a doctrine of karma, makes no difference. When suffering comes into your life, according to the doctrine of karma, your papa karmas are exhausted. It's explained that the papa karmas are fructifying by causing that suffering in your life. Okay, enough said. Doctrine of karma. Next question here from Varsha. Varsha lives in UK. And Varsha says, I find that I am we talked about in our last week's session, we talked about being deeply attached, emotionally attached to family members. And Varsha says, however, in my experience, I find I'm completely the opposite. I'm completely detached. I avoid contact with all my family members, except for my parents. This has been troubling me for years. I've become almost numb to any deeper emotions with regard to family members. I observe it all like a movie, and then I just walk away. Is there something wrong with me? Does this make me a bad person? It makes you a normal person. We are all emotionally different. We have different emotional makeups, different personalities. Some people have a more attachment-based personality. Some people are less attached. Some people are very detached, even from family members. The issue with your emotions is, I said Varsha is normal. What do we mean by normal is a very tricky term, right? So if you were to ask a psychologist, is this normal emotional behavior to be detached from family members and not really care except for your parents, or even including your parents? Is that normal emotional behavior to be so detached? If you ask a psychologist, the psychologist, if it's a good psychologist, he or she will respond, it depends. Normal in psychology means that which does not create an impediment to you to live a fulfilling life. Abnormal is that which prevents you from living a fulfilling life. So that's the issue here. I'm presuming that for Varsha this is normal. So she's not so connected to her family members. Does that prevent her from living a good life? Absolutely not. But there are deeper emotional problems, especially related to families, which create so much suffering, angst, so anxiety and conflict, and to such a degree where it absolutely prevents you from enjoying your life and being engaged in normal activities without being impeded by all that psychological baggage, as people say. That's the dividing line between normal and abnormal. Normal emotions are emotions that don't obstruct you from living your life. Abnormal are those emotions which prevent you from living your life. Normal problems, you don't need to do anything. If they're so-called abnormal, then you perhaps need some help. You need maybe just to talk to a friend could be enough. Maybe to see a therapist might be required. Depends entirely on the situation. Okay, one more question here from Chetan, who also lives in UK. Chetan says, again, reference to last week's satsang. By the way, if you missed the satsang, they're all available online. You can just go and watch any of the past satsangs. Lots of great questions like this. In our last week's satsang, we had a discussion about the sukshma sharira, the subtle body, which is said to detach itself from your physical body at the time of death and travel on to another body. This is all taught according to the doctrine of karma. In that context, I said that the sukshma sharira is part of an elaborate belief system that forms what we call the doctrine of karma. The entire doctrine of karma is a very elaborate belief system. When I call it belief system, it's to acknowledge that it can't be proved, it can't be disproved. It is outside of the scope of scientific inquiry. It cannot be scientifically studied. And if you can't study it, if you can't observe it, then you can't prove it, you can't disprove it. I've said many times the value of a belief is not in its veracity, since its veracity is unknown, right? That's the definition of belief. The value of a belief is not in its veracity. The value of a belief is in its ability to help you. And personally, I find the doctrine of karma to be an extremely helpful belief system. Doesn't mean it's true. From an Advaita Vedantic standpoint, we say we don't know. It's part of the world. We have no idea if it's let me say, it's a belief system. We can't prove it, we can't disprove it. And the sukshma sharira, the subtle body, is part of that belief system. The subtle body is not an entity that can be scientifically studied or measured. So you can't, I didn't mention this last week, I'll bring it up now. I think about 400 or 500 years ago in Europe, there was a scientist who had a very weird theory. He thought that the soul that he called it soul. He said that the soul that leaves the body at the time of death must be an entity, and if it's an entity, it must weigh something. So what this scientist did is he had a whole bunch of rats, and he measured how much they weighed. Then he killed them. Then he measured them again. And he determined that on the average, the soul of a rat weighs 2.4 grams, or whatever number he came up with. So he was attempting to scientifically measure something which is not a physical thing. We call it sukshma sharira, subtle body. By definition, subtle body is not a physical thing. It has no weight, it has no form, no color, it has no such attributes whatsoever. Therefore, it can't be measured. What went wrong with that scientist, apparently they found out not too long afterwards, that after killing the rats, the scientist apparently waited a little while before he weighed them again, and while he was waiting, they underwent desiccation. They started to dry out. Live rats drink water and maintain equilibrium of water in their systems. Dead rats can't drink water. They dry out. So what he was actually measuring was the amount of water that had evaporated from the rat's body. Anyway, it's a true story. Just to illustrate the fact that the sukshma sharira, subtle body, is not an entity that can be scientifically studied, proven, or disproven. Now, that teaching can rub people the wrong way, and apparently it did for Chetan. He said, unfortunately for me, you dismissed the idea of the sukshma sharira as a pre-scientific concept. If it is only a concept, then is it not a fact? Are you dismissing the idea of the sukshma sharira? Did I dismiss the idea? I said it's part of a belief system. A helpful belief system. I think where Chetan has a problem here in the next paragraph. My confusion remains, what is it that departs from the body at the time of death? What is there that makes the body function 1 minute and stops in the next moment? Actually, if you've read anything, any scientific literature, death is not instantaneous. Have you ever thought about that? Is death really instantaneous? And that is indeed the ancient world view, that at some point the subtle body What do you say? Chale gaya. It's gone. and at some particular moment. Modern science has no such way of explaining that. So according to science, death is gradual. Your brain activities gradually cease. By the way, anything physiological in your body is going to change instantly. Isn't death a physiological process? Does it make any sense to say, oh, it happens instantaneously? So the function of your brain decreases gradually. At some point you lose consciousness, but there's still someone home in an unconscious state, in coma. And early on, some people can recover from a coma. Later on, there's no recovery from the coma. And then if the other parts of the body are also affected, the heart stops beating, lungs stop breathing, there's no longer the circulation of blood with oxygen to feed all the cells in your body. Cell death. Do cells die immediately? No. So the cells of the body and brain, importantly, start dying gradually. They don't just all at once die. They die gradually. And at some point, it becomes impossible to bring the patient back from that coma. There's so much damage to the body and brain that there's no possibility of recovering from the coma. We call that death. So death is not, from a scientific standpoint, death is not instantaneous. From a scientific standpoint, what leaves the body at the time of death, last week we discussed that other disproven scientific principle called élan vital. Before they figured out how cells work, about 400 years ago, they actually thought there was European scientists actually embraced an idea very similar to the sukshma sharira in, I think about 300 years ago. And they called it élan vital, vital life. And they said that's the vital life is present inside the cell, it makes it alive, and then the vital life leaves the cell and the cell dies. Well, 300 years ago they figured out that's all bogus. It doesn't work like that. There's no such thing as élan vital. So from a scientific standpoint, nothing leaves the body at the time of death except maybe your last breath, which is always an exhalation, right? So that leaves your body at the time of death. So what is the point of this whole discussion? Sukshma sharira, to understand the subtle body leaving the physical body at the time of death, traveling on and assuming another body, you can't call it a fact because it's not provable or disprovable. It's neither a fact nor a non-fact. It's neither true nor false. It is part of a belief system, a helpful belief system. So when you're with your loved one and your loved one passes away, it's very comforting to feel that my loved one isn't here in my arms right now, but they have traveled on. For most people, that's a very comforting thought. For if you're a scientist holding your loved one, little different perspective. All the cells are not functioning any longer. That would be the scientific perspective on death. So there's something healthy about this doctrine of karma and its belief in sukshma sharira. But it is not a fact. It is an unprovable belief. Can't prove it, can't disprove it. Let me pause here and see, do we have any questions from here? You'll need the microphone. And the video switcher is broken, so I can't put you on the screen.
Namaste, Swamiji. I have a question about consciousness. Consciousness, as I understand, is the basis requirement for life, living existence. And if that is the case, then how it seems to me that why we try to understand consciousness through spirituality, the goal of understanding about consciousness by spirituality is different from the goal in science, although they are also trying to see what is the basis of life living.
Right.
So from that point of view, both spirituality and science may be defining consciousness the same way, but the goal of understanding may be different. In spirituality, it seems to me, it's about, don't think about
Can we go back to your opening statement, please? Because you really had it very clearly at the very beginning when you said that consciousness is necessary for life, right?
All life, yes.
Right. According to whom?
I mean, that's how I have understood it.
Right. And there's actually, from a Vedantic standpoint, there's a mistake in thinking about that. What do we mean by life?
Existence.
Okay. That's a completely different thing.
Oh.
Life means cells living and growing. So now I'm sorry, I really got confused because you said life, because when you say life, I think about cells growing and living. So can we rephrase your question now? And instead of saying life, say existence.
Okay.
Say your question again very briefly, but don't use the word life.
Yeah. Consciousness is necessary, required for existence.
Necessary requirement for existence. That's not at all what Vedanta teaches. What Vedanta teaches is there is a fundamental reality that gives existence and consciousness to everything in the universe.
Okay.
There is one fundamental underlying reality, we call it Brahman. Taittiriya Upanishad says, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. That Brahman is Satyam, existence, and it is Jnanam, consciousness. So think of it, the term I've used, a little poetic, a conscious fabric of existence. The fabric out of which the world is woven is a conscious fabric of existence. So it's not that consciousness and existence are not two different things, which is how your question began. Consciousness and existence are one and the same. Call it Brahman from a cosmic standpoint. Call it Atma from an individual standpoint. Consciousness and existence are two sides of one coin, so to speak. One fundamental reality, which is conscious existence. Does that work for you?
Yes. So that kind of clarifies my misunderstanding in the sense that science probably distinguishes existence and consciousness.
Science can't deal with consciousness, as we discussed. Consciousness can let's return to this point. Can a scientist measure your consciousness? That's an interesting question. How conscious are you? Well, you don't look very conscious at all. I'm being silly, sorry. Consciousness, in philosophical language, is called a private reality. And in philosophy, a private reality is something which is known to you and you alone, like your thoughts. Which means consciousness can't be studied by a scientist. Even your thoughts. If you go and see a psychologist, does a psychologist know what's going on in your head? Clueless. They have to ask you. Because the psychologist has no access whatsoever to your inner world. So really speaking, science doesn't deal with consciousness. Science deals with the world. Consciousness is not accessible to science for study. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions here? Next.
When we were discussing the sukshma sharira, I just remembered a book that I had read long time ago. And in this book, this is like a biography, so to say, by Moorjani, an Indian lady living in
I know who she is. So she had a death experience and claims to have been enlightened as a result of that death experience.
Right. So the question is, this outer body experience that she had, does this have anything to do with sukshma sharira? It looks to me, no. No is the answer.
Well,
Am I right?
There's no necessary connection whatsoever. So whether there is or is not a sukshma sharira, you can have any kind of experience, out-of-body experience, especially when you're dying. Think of the changes your brain is undergoing. All kinds of experiences will happen. And then if you reach the almost die and then come back from death, then you report all kinds of strange experiences. Well, not surprisingly, your brain was in a very altered condition, and a brain in a very altered condition will have all kinds of strange experiences. So I don't see any connection whatsoever.
But the end is really very, very difficult to explain.
The end.
She died, she had cancer.
Yes.
And she went through this coma, and then when she came back,
so yes,
her cancer was gone.
That's something for doctors to answer.
No, I'm not.
I'm saying it's an issue for medical science of why her cancer was gone, and why should we conclude that it had anything to do with sukshma sharira? It's all conjecture. Also, most of you know that I have to tell you, I am allergic to anecdotal evidence. And I want to explain why. So you give her experience as a data point. So she has some out-of-body experience. Does experience establish fact? How many times have you watched the sun go down? The sun doesn't travel. It's the earth rotating. Experience does not determine reality. The example I've used so many times. Atoms are almost all empty space. Why do things seem solid? Experience has to be one of the most misleading things in the world. So somebody has, if we acknowledge the fact that experience doesn't determine what is true, and then so-and-so has an out-of-body experience, a near-death experience, or some kind of mystical experience, and then they come back and write a book about it. I have to say, this drives me nuts. Because it's taking an experience and turning it into a philosophy. I'm going to write a book about why the sun goes down. The earth doesn't turn on its axis, the sun goes down. Why? Because I experienced it 1,000 times. So I'm going to write a book about it. It's my experience. What's the point? Now suppose somebody has an out-of-body experience or a near-death experience. I don't doubt the nature of their experience. It was something amazing, awesome, wonderful, excellent. experience doesn't determine facts, truth, reality. So why write a book about it? Sorry, this is my pet peeve with anecdotal evidence. No more books about that. Okay, let's take some more questions here. This question comes from Amit, who lives in India. It says, many people believe in the law of attraction, manifestation, the power of faith. If you can imagine it, you can make it happen. You will things. What was that? That power of positive thinking and all of this stuff. Anyway. This is a long paragraph, so let me try to summarize. Many people are come to Advaita Vedanta after being exposed to things like Autobiography of a Yogi, the famous book of Yogananda, Paramahamsa Yogananda. I also read it when I was young. And it's full of these amazing spiritual experiences. Spiritual experiences were right back there. Okay, so in that book, Autobiography of a Yogi, all kinds of experiences. People who imagine themselves as being wealthy and then they get wealthy, then they write a book about their experience. I imagine myself being wealthy and I used the power of my imagination to become wealthy. This is, again, an individual person's experience. Have an experience, write a book about it. Have an experience that the sun goes down, write a book about it. Okay, so here in Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda had lots of amazing spiritual experiences, and he wrote about them. Does it mean those experiences convey facts? Not necessarily. Again, experience does not equal fact. Can we agree on that? Experience is what it is, but experiences are not facts. So Yogananda had a lot of spiritual experiences, wonderful, and they no doubt contributed to his spiritual growth. But those experiences are not facts. Now, Amit doesn't, pardon me, Amit, for imagining what might be in your mind. Amit goes on to say that we have Vedantic teachings which take things as they are, cold facts. So Amit finds this statement to be a cold fact, to discount these out-of-body experiences, to discount law of attraction, to discount miracles. And Vedanta goes for cold facts, discounting all of this. Amit says, but they were inspiring. I was inspired by these miracles. I was inspired by reading the Yogananda's book, etc. Nothing wrong with being inspired, but let us discern the difference between experience and fact. Now, he uses this expression, cold facts. He says, how do we see the world? That everything in life is God's creation is a miracle, or nothing in life is a miracle, but based on fixed explainable laws. So Amit apparently feels that this fact-based approach takes the magic out of life, the miraculous, the beauty out of life. And I couldn't disagree more. Nothing in life is a miracle except based on fixed explainable laws. Those fixed explainable laws are miraculous to me. The fact that the law of gravity is so consistent is something mind-boggling. There is a perfection in nature. How the world is created, how the world maintains its form, how the laws of nature work. To me, that's miraculous. And we can see that miracle. If we go looking, here's, I'm not sure that, I need to say this. It's important to say this. People who look for, and I'm not saying this is a myth. I'm not saying this at all about a myth. But there are some people in life who look for miracles, who need to find miracles, because the world is not enough. The world is a terrible place. It's full of misery, hunger, war, all of this, horrible things. So people cling to a higher reality. They cling to the miraculous. Personally, I find that unfortunate, because by clinging to what they imagine to exist, these miracles don't exist. They cling to imaginary miracles, and doing so, they deprive themselves of the ability to see the miracle happening in the world right now. In spite of this war, I heard a news article on what's going on in Iran. And these poor people were getting bombed like crazy, and they're still singing and dancing and living their lives. That's the miracle. The miracle is, in spite of the problems that we human beings create, people find a way to live and enjoy their lives. The world in itself is a miracle. To look for a miracle beyond the world means you're not looking for the miracle in the world, which is the world, the miraculous existence that's already here now. Ishvara's, we call it Ishvara Srishti, God's creation. God's creation is absolutely amazing. By the way, a little technical point here. By definition, that which is a miracle is that which is outside of the laws of nature, right? Do you agree? There's a simple definition. By definition, a miracle is outside of the laws of nature. The laws of nature, from a Vedantic standpoint, are Ishvara's laws. Ishvara's intelligent order. Therefore, if you define a miracle as being beyond the laws of nature, from a Vedantic standpoint, it means that that miracle is beyond the intelligent order of Ishvara. That miracle was not even willed by Ishvara. That miracle happened apne-ap, as you would say, on its own, without Ishvara's involvement. It just happened. Not helpful. Much more helpful to see that the world that Ishvara created is a miracle. Look for the miraculous in the world. We need not look beyond, because looking beyond the world, from my standpoint, demeans the value of the world. The world is a terrible place. We have to look beyond. By the way, isn't that kind of the thread that you find through biblical religions? The world is a terrible place. You better get out and go to heaven. The world is not a terrible place. There are plenty of terrible things that happen in the world. Absolutely horrible things that happen in the world. But the world is not a terrible place. To me, the world is a miraculous place, a wonderful place. Okay, a couple more questions and we'll conclude for today. This question. Oh, this is a good one. This question comes from Peter. Peter lives in Germany. Nice. And Peter says, on several occasions you said that true happiness lies within. Of course, I'm not unique in saying that. It's pretty much a common saying that true happiness comes from within. In addition, you said Brahman is not a thing outside, but Brahman is found within. So, what do you mean by within? Excellent question. Very good question. By within, I mean, there are two basic directions we can focus our attention in. We generally focus our attention outwards into the world. Our eyes point out into the world, our ears pick up things in the world, our five senses all attuned to gathering information about the world. And most of our attention throughout the day, we're focused on what's going on outside. And from our prior discussions, we've made it very clear that nothing outside is the source of happiness. And I'll give you just my favorite example of this. If you think that some object outside is a source of happiness, the example I've used before is ice cream. If ice cream is really a source of happiness, then if you eat 1 cup of ice cream, you get happy. 2 cups, twice as happy. 4 cups, eat several gallons of ice cream and see what happens. So, happiness is not something outside, yet the primary focus of our lives is outside. What Vedanta begins with is to turn your attention within. Now, what do I mean by within? That's surprisingly difficult to answer. To look within, we call this process Atma Vichara, self-inquiry. What does self-inquiry mean? It means, in English we simply call it introspection. Introspection means to look within yourself, but this brings us to Peter's question. What does it mean to look within yourself? Well, there are levels. One is, I don't think we don't want to look inside our physical bodies, right? That's, you use an endoscope, pull it down your throat, and then look and see what's inside. That's obviously not what we mean by looking inside. At a surface level, inside could mean within your mind, at a surface level. What's going on in your mind? And it turns out what's happening in your mind is far more consequential than what's happening outside your mind. Think about how you live your life. Plenty of things happen outside around you in your environment, at home, at work, on the roads, everywhere. But tell me, which affects you more? What's happening at home or what's happening in your mind? What's happening in your workplace or what's happening in your mind? Which affects you more? Yeah, absolutely. So this is primary in Vedanta. So on a surface level, to look within means to turn your attention away from the physical world outside, to turn your attention to your own mind, your thoughts and emotions, and we don't stop there. Thoughts and emotions are known. Known to whom? Seeking an answer to that question is what Vedanta is all about. And that sounds like an oversimplification, but it's not. Because it's a big topic we're not going to get into. We're going to wrap up this satsang in just a moment. Well, so let's leave it here, that Vedanta leads you to turn your attention away from worldly activities and things, to turn your attention within. Superficially, you turn your mind within to encounter your thoughts and emotions, but then further in. And here, in metaphorically. And maybe that's a problem that Peter's talking about. Maybe Peter's from Germany. Maybe it's a linguistic thing. The word in, what does in mean? The opposite of out, fine. But what exactly does that mean? And the simple answer to it is a life of Vedanta is about introspection, about being concerned with realities that are not out there, but realities that are in here, meaning realities of your mind, realities of your thoughts and emotions, and the reality of the consciousness by which your thoughts and emotions are known. So that's what we mean by in. It's kind of a surprisingly tricky question. What do you mean by in? I hope that's a little helpful to Peter, and I think this will be a good place. We'll conclude today with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Hamritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat. See you next time.